The morning air was calm, and the city moved at its usual busy pace. Among the tall glass buildings and crowded streets, there was one woman who had worked harder than most people could ever imagine. She was the CEO of a successful chain of luxury car dealerships, known across the state for their sparkling showrooms and the finest cars available. Yet, despite her position, she believed in humility and simplicity. She was not the kind of person who felt the need to show off her wealth or power. She wore simple clothes, often without expensive jewelry, and she preferred to blend in with ordinary people rather than stand out. That morning, she made a decision that would soon turn into a lesson for everyone at her company. After finishing a long meeting with some partners, she thought it would be a good idea to stop by one of her dealerships unannounced. She had built her business on the belief that customers should be treated with kindness and respect no matter who they were. To make sure this belief was truly being followed, she often visited her branches quietly, without telling the staff that she was coming. That way, she could see how customers were really treated when no one was watching. This particular dealership was one of her favorites. It had a wide showroom, shining floors, and cars lined up like jewels on display. It was the kind of place that should make any customer feel welcomed. When she entered the showroom, the golden lights reflected off the polished cars. Their surfaces gleamed like mirrors, and the air smelled faintly of leather and new paint. Several other customers were inside, and she noticed how the sales team quickly rushed toward them, smiling, offering brochures, and even bringing coffee or water. But when she stepped in, dressed simply in a plain blouse and comfortable shoes, nobody approached her. At first, she thought perhaps they were busy, but as minutes passed, she began to realize that something was different. The woman walked slowly along the rows of luxury cars, admiring them, touching the cold metal with her fingertips. These were not just cars to her. They were dreams on wheels, each model carefully chosen under her approval, each detail representing her years of effort. But the staff treated her as if she were invisible. They whispered among themselves, exchanging looks, and one of them even laughed quietly as she passed. She caught a few words comments about how she didn't look like someone who belonged there. She kept her face calm, though inside, she felt both hurt and curious. Nearby, she saw a family being treated warmly by a salesperson. The father was shown brochures, the mother was offered coffee, and their children were given small toy cars to play with. The CEO's eyes softened at that moment because this was exactly how customers should be treated, with respect and care. But when she stepped closer, the salesman quickly moved away, as if afraid she might disturb his real clients. It was as if she were not worth even a simple greeting. Despite the cold treatment, the CEO kept walking. She stopped in front of a luxury car she remembered approving last month. It was sleek, with a design that would attract anyone who loved cars. She leaned closer, running her hand across the smooth door handle, admiring the shine of the paint. At that very moment, a man stepped forward. He was the manager of the dealership, dressed in a crisp suit with a polished name tag. Instead of welcoming her, his expression was sharp, almost mocking. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone carrying more annoyance than politeness. The CEO smiled softly and replied, "Yes, I was just looking at this model. It's beautiful." The manager crossed his arms and looked her up and down. "These cars," he said slowly, as if speaking to someone who didn't understand, "are not for everyone. They are very expensive, and we don't want to waste time showing them to people who can't afford them." His words fell like heavy stones, each one filled with disrespect. Other employees nearby pretended to stay busy, but she noticed some of them glancing nervously at the situation. A couple of customers looked over as well, curious about what was happening. The CEO remained calm, though. She had faced countless challenges in her life, from starting her business with almost nothing to building an empire that now stood before her. If she had learned anything, it was patience. The manager, however, seemed eager to prove his authority. He stepped closer and added, I think you should look at cars that are more within your range. Maybe something used, in a smaller dealership. This place is for serious buyers only. The CEO nodded quietly, not showing her feelings. On the inside, though, she was deeply disappointed. Not because he had insulted her personally, but because this dealership, her dealership, was supposed to be built on the principle of respect for every person who walked through the door. And now, standing right here, she was watching that very principle being broken by the man in charge. As she stood in silence, she noticed one young employee at the corner of the room. He looked fresh, probably new to the job. Unlike the others, he seemed uneasy with the manager's words. His eyes darted between the CEO and the manager, and he shifted nervously as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. The CEO caught this small detail and held it in her heart. Sometimes, the youngest voices carried the most truth. The woman decided not to reveal who she was, not yet. Instead, she kept exploring the showroom. Every step she took reminded her of the difference in how she was being treated compared to others. Customers were greeted with warmth, offered assistance, and treated like royalty. But she was left to stand alone, brushed aside as if she were nothing more than an intruder. It was a painful sight, but also an important one. This visit had already shown her more about her staff than any report or meeting ever could. As the minutes passed, the manager grew more impatient. He whispered to one of the salesmen, pointing at her, and laughed under his breath. The CEO heard every word, but she kept her dignity. She wasn't there to argue. She was there to watch, to learn, and to see the truth for herself. Little did they know that their behavior was about to change their lives forever. By the time she reached the far side of the showroom, she had seen enough to understand the culture inside this place. The cars shone like treasures, but the attitude of some staff members was stained with arrogance and judgment. She took a deep breath and turned back toward the center of the showroom. She knew that this story was only beginning, and the real test of character for both her and the staff was still to come. The manager stood tall in front of the black woman, his arms crossed, his chin slightly raised as if he had already judged her without even knowing who she was. His sharp eyes scanned her plain clothes and simple appearance, and his lips curled into a half-smile that was more insulting than friendly. Around the showroom, the atmosphere began to change. A few employees tried to keep working, showing cars to other customers, but it was impossible not to notice the uncomfortable tension building in the middle of the floor. The woman CEO stayed calm, her posture relaxed. She had learned long ago that anger often gave power to the wrong person. Instead, she decided to listen, to let the manager reveal exactly who he was. She kept her voice gentle as she said, I'd like to know more about this model. It looks very well designed. But the manager's reaction was immediate and dismissive. He laughed softly under his breath and said, I don't think this car is meant for someone like you. It's one of our most expensive models, far out of the range for ordinary people. We usually spend our time with customers who are serious about making a purchase, not those who are just looking. His words were loud enough that nearby customers and staff could hear. A couple standing across the showroom looked up in surprise, their eyes moving between the manager and the woman. One of them whispered something, clearly disturbed by how openly disrespectful he was being. Yet the manager either did not notice or did not care. To him, she was just another person wasting his time. The CEO continued to examine the car. She touched the steering wheel lightly, admiring the craftsmanship. It really is a beautiful car, she said with a smile. How long has it been available here? The manager sighed, almost rolling his eyes. Ma'am, I don't think you understand. This is not a car you just ask about casually. The people who come here to buy these vehicles are wealthy, high-status individuals. They know what they're looking for, and they don't walk in off the street without an appointment. He then added in a lower but still cutting tone, honestly, you're wasting my time and embarrassing yourself. The CEO kept her composure, though her heart was heavy. This dealership, which carried her name at the top of every contract and bill, was supposed to be a place of respect and professionalism. Yet here was the manager, the very person responsible for setting an example, treating her as if she were invisible or unworthy. At that moment, one of the younger sales employees walked closer, carrying a file of brochures. He looked uneasy, his eyes moving quickly between the manager and the woman. For a second, the CEO caught his gaze, and she saw recognition flicker in his expression. He knew who she was, but he stayed silent, clearly afraid of losing his job if he spoke against his boss. The manager continued, his tone now sharper. "Listen," he said, "if you're here to take pictures or just admire cars, I suggest you do it quickly and leave. We have important clients coming in soon, and I don't want them thinking this place is some kind of public exhibition. These are luxury cars, not something you can dream about and then walk away from." The words stung, not because they were true, they were not, but because of the arrogance behind them. The CEO's life had been full of struggles where people doubted her. She remembered the early years when banks refused to give her loans, when people laughed at the idea of her owning even a small dealership. Yet she had worked day and night, proving them wrong with every step. Now, to stand in her own dealership and hear this kind of disrespect was both painful and eye-opening. She glanced around and noticed more customers watching. Some were shaking their heads disapprovingly at the manager's behavior. A woman near the corner whispered to her husband, clearly uncomfortable with the way things were unfolding. The employees too were restless, a few kept their eyes on the ground, pretending not to hear, while others exchanged uneasy glances. The CEO finally asked, "Is this how you usually speak to your customers?" The manager raised his eyebrows as though surprised she dared question him. "I speak to people according to how serious they are. Some customers come in ready to buy, and we treat them with full respect. Others, like you, wander around without a clue, and we can't afford to waste company resources on them." His voice carried a sense of pride, as if he believed his judgment of people was flawless. The woman CEO's lips curved into the faintest smile. She did not argue, nor did she defend herself. She knew that people revealed their character best when they felt untouchable. Right now, this manager felt invincible in his position, convinced that his word was final and his power unquestionable. But he had no idea who was standing in front of him. For a brief moment, the young employee holding the brochures stepped forward, his lips parting as if he wanted to say something. But then the manager shot him a sharp look, and he froze in place, clutching the brochures to his chest. The CEO saw it all. She admired the young man's courage but also understood his fear. She decided to remember his face. The manager then gestured toward the door. "If you're not here to buy, I really suggest you leave. I don't want security to have to escort you out. We run a professional business here." Those words echoed in the air. A hush fell over the customers, as if everyone was waiting for the woman's reaction. But instead of responding with anger, she gave a gentle nod and stepped back from the car. Her silence was more powerful than any argument. Inside, though, she had already made her decision. She would not allow this kind of disrespect to poison the culture of her company. A business built on arrogance was a business already heading toward failure. She would let the manager continue, let him dig the hole deeper with every arrogant word, and when the moment was right, she would reveal the truth that would shake the entire room. The woman slowly walked toward another car, pretending to examine it while the manager muttered something under his breath. The staff returned to their duties, though most of them kept stealing glances at her, wondering who she really was. The customers, too, continued to whisper, some clearly angry that someone could be treated in such a degrading way. The tension grew heavier with every passing moment. The manager believed he was winning, that he had put her in her place. But the truth was the opposite. Each word, each disrespectful gesture, was becoming evidence against him. The CEO stood calmly, waiting, planning, and knowing that very soon, the balance of power would shift. She looked once more at the cars she had chosen for this dealership. Each one was a symbol of her journey, of her rise from nothing to success. And now, standing in the middle of them, being dismissed by the very person meant to protect her vision, she realized this was more than just a casual visit. This was a test for her staff, for her leadership, and for the values of her company. The manager had already failed. The real moment of truth was coming soon. The CEO walked slowly along the polished showroom floor, her eyes moving from one luxury car to another. She knew these cars better than anyone in the building. She had personally approved each design, each model, and even the way they should be displayed. Yet here she was, being treated as if she had no right to even touch them. The words of the manager still echoed in her mind, his arrogant tone, his dismissive smirk, and his open disbelief that she could ever afford such vehicles. But instead of anger, she felt a calm strength rise inside her. She had not come here to prove herself to anyone. She had come to see the truth, and the truth was revealing itself more clearly with every passing minute. She paused in front of another car, this one a bold black model with shining chrome edges. Its sleek design reflected the bright lights of the showroom, and the CEO admired it quietly. She reached out to open the door, and before she could even take a closer look, the manager walked up again. His shoes tapped loudly against the marble floor as he approached, his expression filled with irritation. "Excuse me," he said firmly, "I already told you that these cars are not for everyone. You're wasting time here. If you can't respect that, I'll have to ask you to leave." The CEO tilted her head slightly, her calm gaze meeting his. "I just wanted to know a little more," she said in a gentle tone. "Is this model selling well?" The manager gave a short, mocking laugh. "Selling well? Ma'am, do you even understand the price tag on this car? People who buy these don't walk in here wearing simple clothes and asking casual questions. They arrive in their own expensive vehicles, dressed in suits, and they know exactly what they want. You should go somewhere else. Perhaps a used car lot would be more suitable." A silence spread across the room. Customers who had been pretending not to watch were now openly staring. Employees shifted uncomfortably, some clearly embarrassed, others pretending to be focused on paperwork. The young salesman who had recognized her earlier still stood near the corner, holding the brochures tightly in his hands. His face showed both fear and disbelief, as though he could not understand why the manager would speak in such a way to the woman who owned everything around them. The CEO decided to ask another question, her voice steady and soft. "You must know a lot about this dealership," she said, watching him carefully. "Do you run the place?" The manager straightened his shoulders proudly. "Yes," he replied with confidence. "I am the one in charge here. Everything that happens in this dealership goes through me. I know my customers, I know the business, and I don't waste time on people who don't belong." His words carried an air of pride, as if he were bragging about his ability to judge people on sight. The CEO listened quietly. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, waiting to see how she would respond. But instead of revealing herself, she let the manager continue. She wanted him to show the full extent of his arrogance, to expose himself in front of everyone. Only then would the lesson be complete. The manager smirked again, lowering his voice so only she and a few nearby staff could hear. "Honestly, I've seen people like you before. You come in, pretending to be interested, but you're just here to look around. I don't know what you expect, but this place is not a museum. These cars are for people who can afford them. And frankly, you don't look like one of them." The CEO took a deep breath, her eyes moving around the showroom. She noticed the customers, some of them frowning at the manager's words, others whispering to each other. A middle-aged man shook his head in disgust, while a woman near the entrance muttered something under her breath about poor customer service. The employees too were restless. Some of them looked down at the floor, ashamed, while others shifted uncomfortably in their spots. The young salesman finally took a step forward, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Sir," he said softly to the manager, "maybe we should treat her with more respect." He stopped suddenly as the manager turned sharply toward him, his eyes flashing with anger. "What did you say?" the manager snapped. The young man froze, his face pale. He quickly lowered his eyes and shook his head. "Nothing, sir." "I just thought." "Don't think," the manager interrupted. "Just do your job. Leave this to me." His voice was sharp, and the young employee stepped back, clutching the brochures tighter, his face burning with embarrassment. The CEO's eyes softened as she looked at him. She admired his courage, even if he hadn't finished his sentence. He had tried, and that meant something. The manager turned back to the CEO, his smirk returning. "Now, as I was saying, if you're not here to buy, then please, stop wasting our time." The CEO gave him a small smile. "You seem very sure of yourself," she said. "Of course," the manager replied proudly. "I've been doing this job for years. I know who belongs in a place like this and who doesn't. That's why this dealership is so successful, because I keep it professional." The CEO looked around the showroom once more. The irony of his words was almost painful. Here was a man claiming success, while his actions were poisoning the very values she had built her business on. But she remained calm, knowing that the truth would soon come out. For now, she decided to push him further, to let him continue digging his own hole. She asked another question. "And what about the owner of this dealership?" she said lightly. "Do you know them well?" The manager chuckled. "Of course I do. The owner is a busy person, someone who doesn't waste time walking into showrooms like this. Trust me, they would never come in dressed like this." He waved his hand at her simple clothes, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "The owner is someone of status, someone I deal with professionally. You wouldn't understand." The CEO held back a laugh. His words were so full of pride and ignorance that even some of the customers shook their heads in disbelief. A man near the cars muttered, "Unbelievable," under his breath. The young employee looked like he wanted to disappear, his eyes wide with shock. The CEO straightened her posture, her calm smile never leaving her face. She decided not to reveal herself yet. There was still more to learn, more for the manager to expose in front of everyone. She knew that when the time came, her revelation would not only shock him but also teach the entire staff a lesson they would never forget. So she kept her silence, asking one more innocent-sounding question. "What if the owner walked in here right now? Would you treat them differently?" The manager laughed loudly, shaking his head. "That will never happen. I know the owner well, and trust me, they're nothing like you. Now please, don't waste any more of my time." The CEO nodded quietly, her eyes steady. Inside, she knew the time was coming soon. The manager had shown enough of his true self. The customers were watching, the employees were restless, and the young salesman's nervous courage had already planted a seed of hope. The next moment would change everything, not just for the manager, but for the entire dealership. She walked slowly back toward the center of the showroom, her simple footsteps echoing in the heavy silence. Everyone's eyes followed her, waiting, sensing that something important was about to happen. The manager still thought he was in control, still believed his arrogance gave him power. But the CEO knew better. She had been patient, and now the moment of truth was close. The air felt different, charged with anticipation. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, the customers leaned closer, and even the young salesman stood frozen in place. The CEO's calm presence seemed to fill the room with quiet strength. Soon, very soon, her true identity would come to light, and nothing in this dealership would ever be the same again. The air in the dealership grew heavier as the CEO stood quietly in the middle of the showroom. Her calm presence contrasted with the nervous energy filling the room. Every eye, whether from staff or customers, seemed locked on her. Even though no one yet knew who she truly was, they sensed something unusual about the way she carried herself. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't argue, but there was a dignity about her that commanded attention. The manager, however, misread the silence. Believing he had won, he straightened his suit jacket and puffed out his chest with pride. "Well," he said with a smirk, "I think we've wasted enough time here. If you don't mind, I'll return to my real clients." His voice carried across the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. His words were meant to dismiss her, to end the scene with him as the victor. But the CEO remained still. She looked at him, her expression calm but firm, and then spoke in a steady voice. "Before you go," she said softly, "could you fetch the ownership documents for this dealership from your office? I'd like to take a look at them." Her words made the manager pause. For a brief second, his smirk faltered. "Ownership documents," he repeated, frowning. Then he laughed, shaking his head as though she had asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Customers don't get to see ownership documents. That's confidential information. Do you think you're the owner or something?" The CEO smiled gently, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes," she said. A ripple of shock spread through the showroom. Some customers gasped softly, others exchanged quick glances. The employees froze, their faces pale, their bodies stiff. The young salesman who had recognized her earlier suddenly let out a breath, relief flooding his expression. He knew now that she was finally revealing the truth. The manager blinked at her, stunned for a moment, then quickly burst into laughter. "You? The owner?" he scoffed. "Don't make me laugh. I've met the owner before. You don't look anything like her. The owner is a powerful woman, someone who commands respect, not," he waved his hand at her simple clothes with open disdain. "Not someone like you." The CEO reached calmly into her handbag. The room was silent, waiting, every second stretched into eternity. She pulled out a sleek black folder and opened it, revealing an official identification card with her name, her photo, and her title clearly printed, Chief Executive Officer and owner of the dealership chain. She held it up for everyone to see. Gasps filled the air. The customers leaned forward, eyes wide. The staff's jaws dropped, their faces painted with shock. The young employees' eyes lit up with pride, as if justice had finally been served. The manager, however, went pale. His confident smirk vanished. His mouth opened, then closed again, as though the words he wanted to say refused to form. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the ID card. The CEO's voice cut through the silence, calm but firm. "I am the owner of this dealership," she said, her tone steady and commanding. "Every car in this showroom, every contract signed, every sale made, it all runs under my approval. And you, the person responsible for protecting my company's reputation, have shown me nothing but arrogance, disrespect, and dishonesty." The manager stuttered, trying to find his words. I didn't know." "I thought you thought wrong," the CEO interrupted. Her eyes were sharp now, no longer gentle. "You judged me by my appearance, by my clothes, by your own narrow assumptions. You treated me as if I was beneath you, as if I didn't deserve to be here. You disrespected not only me but also every principle this company was built on." The room was so quiet that even the faint hum of the showroom lights could be heard. Customers stood still, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads at the audacity of the manager. The employees looked terrified, realizing that the woman they had ignored and dismissed was the one who signed their paychecks. The CEO took a step closer to the manager. "Do you know what the mission of this dealership is?" she asked. The manager swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. 2. To sell luxury cars. No, the CEO said sharply. It is to treat every person who walks through those doors with respect. To make them feel valued, whether they come to buy a car, ask a question, or simply look around. This business was built not just on sales but on trust, dignity, and fairness. And you have failed in every way to uphold those values. The manager's face burned red. Sweat trickled down his temple as he tried to explain. I didn't mean any harm. I thought you were just another person wasting time. If I had known, the CEO raised her hand, cutting him off. That is exactly the problem. Respect should never depend on who you think a person is. It should not depend on their clothes, their background, or your judgment. If you can only respect power, then you do not deserve to have any power yourself. A murmur of agreement rose from the customers. Some clapped softly, while others nodded firmly. The employees shifted nervously, their eyes flickering between the manager and the CEO. Then came the moment that would be remembered forever. The CEO's voice rang clear and final, as of this moment, you are no longer the manager of this dealership. You are fired. Leave immediately. Gasps echoed again, louder this time. The manager's face went blank, his pride crumbling into disbelief. You can't do that, he stammered. I've worked here for years. I've brought in sales, I've managed this place, and you have destroyed its values, the CEO interrupted firmly. You have embarrassed this company in front of customers, disrespected staff, and insulted the very person who trusted you with leadership. Years of work cannot erase minutes of arrogance. Now leave. Security, alerted by the tension, had already approached quietly from the back. At the CEO's nod, they stepped forward. The manager tried to protest again, his words stumbling over each other, but no one listened. His power was gone, his arrogance stripped away. Customers turned their backs on him, staff avoided his eyes, and with each step he took toward the door, he shrank further into humiliation. As he was escorted out, the room erupted not in chaos, but in applause. Customers clapped, some even cheering softly. The employees looked relieved, as though a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. The young salesman smiled for the first time, his eyes shining with pride. The CEO stood tall in the center of it all, her calm authority filling the room. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't shouted, but her words had been sharp enough to cut through arrogance like glass. She looked at her staff, her customers, and then spoke once more. This, she said, is a reminder to all of us. We are not in the business of selling cars alone. We are in the business of respect, dignity, and service. No customer, no visitor, should ever walk out of here feeling small or unwanted. This company will rise higher only if we treat every person with honor. The staff nodded quickly, some with tears in their eyes. Customers murmured their agreement, some even saying they would remain loyal clients after witnessing her strength. The CEO turned to the young employee who had tried to speak earlier. And you, she said with a smile, you had the courage to step forward. That is leadership. That is integrity. From today, your voice will be heard. The young man's eyes widened, his face glowing with gratitude. Thank you, ma'am, he whispered, his voice shaking. The CEO nodded, then turned back toward the crowd. The moment was over, but the impact would last for years. The arrogant manager was gone, the lesson had been delivered, and the reputation of her company had been protected. The showroom, once heavy with tension, now felt alive with hope. The CEO had proven not just her authority but her heart. And everyone who had witnessed it would carry the story forward, a story of respect, justice, and the fall of arrogance in the presence of true strength. The dealership was silent for a few moments after the manager had been escorted out. Everyone was still processing what had just happened. The arrogant man who moments earlier had been so confident, so proud, had been stripped of his authority right in front of their eyes. The CEO stood calmly in the middle of the showroom, her simple clothes now seeming to glow with the dignity of her presence. Customers whispered among themselves, some with admiration, others with astonishment, while the staff stood stiffly, not knowing whether to look directly at her or keep their eyes down. The CEO took a slow breath and began to walk across the polished floor. Her heels clicked softly against the marble, each step measured and graceful. When she stopped in front of the staff, she looked at them not with anger but with a steady gaze that carried both strength and compassion. "What happened here today," she said gently, "is something we all must learn from." Her voice was soft, but it carried across the entire showroom. Customers leaned closer to hear, employees stood straighter, and the young salesman who had recognized her earlier clutched his brochures as if they were proof of something greater. "This company," the CEO continued, "was built from the ground up with one simple belief, that people matter. Every person who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with respect, no matter what they look like, no matter what they wear, no matter who they are. A car may cost millions, but respect costs nothing. And yet today, I saw that principle broken." Her words cut through the room, not in cruelty but in truth. Employees shifted uncomfortably, some ashamed, others nodding quietly as if agreeing deep inside. Customers nodded as well, their expressions softening, their admiration growing with each sentence. "I want each of you to understand something very clearly," she went on. "Our reputation is not built on shiny floors or luxury cars. Those things can be bought. What cannot be bought is trust. If even one customer leaves here feeling belittled or unwanted, then we have failed not just as a business, but as people." The young salesman raised his eyes timidly, and she caught his gaze. For a moment, her sternness softened, and she smiled at him. "This young man," she said, gesturing toward him, "showed more integrity in one moment than his superior did in all his years here. He recognized me. He wanted to speak. He felt that something was wrong. And though he was afraid, he tried." The staff turned to look at the young employee, who flushed with both pride and nervousness. The CEO stepped closer to him. "What is your name?" she asked. "Daniel," he replied softly. "Daniel," she said, her voice warm now, "from today, you are no longer just a salesman. You will be promoted to a role where your voice can guide others. Leadership is not about arrogance. Leadership is about courage, humility, and respect. And you have shown those qualities." Daniel's eyes widened, his hands trembling as he clutched the brochures. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Customers around the room clapped, some smiling widely, others even cheering softly. The CEO raised her hand to quiet the applause, then looked back at her employees. "I will not allow this company to forget why it exists. From today, there will be retraining for everyone: managers, sales staff, assistants. Each of you will be reminded of what it means to serve, not just to sell. If you cannot treat people with dignity, you will not work here." The staff nodded quickly, their faces pale but also filled with determination. Some of them whispered to each other that they were grateful the truth had come out, because they too had felt the weight of the manager's arrogance. Turning back to the customers, the CEO gave a small bow of her head. "I apologize to all of you for what you witnessed today," she said sincerely. "This is not who we are. This is not who we will ever be again. You deserve better, and I promise you, from this moment forward, you will receive it." A middle-aged man stepped forward from among the customers. He clapped his hands firmly and said, "No apology needed, ma'am. What we saw today only proved that you are a leader worth respecting. If anything, you've earned more customers today than you've lost." His words were followed by loud applause from others, and even some cheers. The CEO smiled, touched by the support. She felt the tension in the room dissolve, replaced with an energy of hope and renewal. People who had walked in as strangers now felt united by the moment they had just witnessed. As the applause faded, the CEO walked slowly to the center of the showroom again, her eyes sweeping across the cars. They stood like silent witnesses to everything that had happened: the arrogance, the disrespect, the truth, and now the justice. She had built this empire with her own hands, and she knew now more than ever that its strength did not lie in the cars themselves, but in the values behind them. She turned to Daniel one last time. "Remember this moment," she told him softly. "Leadership is not about power. It is about responsibility. Hold that close, and you will never fail." Daniel nodded quickly, his eyes shining with determination. The CEO then looked at her staff as a whole. "From today, we move forward differently," she said. "This is not just a business. It is a promise. A promise that anyone who walks through those doors will be seen, heard, and respected. That is how we will grow, not just in wealth, but in honor." The staff clapped quietly, some with tears in their eyes. They knew they had been given another chance, a chance to rebuild not only the reputation of the dealership but also their own character. The customers began to leave one by one, but many stopped to shake the CEO's hand or to thank her for what she had done. Some even said they would be returning to buy from her dealership, not just because of the cars but because of the values she had shown. When the last customer left and the staff returned to their duties, the CEO stood for a moment in the quiet showroom. The sun shone through the glass windows, casting a warm light over the cars. She smiled to herself, knowing that today had not just been about firing a disrespectful manager. It had been about reminding everyone, including herself, why she had built this business in the first place. Respect, dignity, integrity. Those were the pillars that mattered most, and they would continue to guide her company into the future. As she walked out of the dealership, Daniel hurried to open the door for her, his face full of pride and gratitude. She gave him a nod of encouragement and stepped out into the sunlight. The day felt brighter, the air fresher. She knew the story of what had happened inside would spread quickly. People would talk about the CEO who was denied service in her own dealership, about how she revealed herself, and about how the arrogant manager was fired on the spot. But more importantly, they would remember the lesson she left behind: that true success comes not from wealth or status, but from treating others with respect. And so, the story closed not with anger or bitterness, but with hope. A dealership reborn, a young leader given a chance, and a powerful reminder to everyone who heard the tale: never judge a person by what they wear, never dismiss them by how they look. Because behind simple appearances can stand a giant, and behind quiet dignity can rest the true power to change everything.